Thank you everyone for coming. Um, I'm very excited to welcome Jenara Nerenberg to speak to us today about her book and about her experiences with Groupthink. Jenara, do you want to give yourself a more complete introduction?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, to you and the whole team. Yeah, I'm joining from Kathmandu today, so a totally different time zone. Background is from Berkeley and Harvard. I studied political theory and then I did a master's in public health. But my interests were very interdisciplinary, so I got into journalism and media and just started getting writing assignments on various topics. Moved back to the States, kind of got really interested in the world of psychology. So I started reporting more in that area. And then that led to some book deals. I'm from San Francisco, California, and grew up in a very kind of unique family, very international, multiracial, multi-faith. So I always felt like I had a kind of different lens on things from a lot of my peers. And yeah, and yeah, my most recent book is Trust Your Mind, which came out May of 2025. And yeah, happy to discuss all of that today and sort of why I decided to write that book.
Wonderful. Um, Maybe, we can dive right in. I don't know if any of the attendees has had a chance to take a look at the book. So we might want to, you have, Nate?
I finished it this morning, yeah.
Alrighty. Well, that's exciting. So often when you host an author on one of these, their book is upcoming, and you're like, here's where you can pre-order it. But we sort of are speaking out without as much context. So this is quite nice. Um, but one of the things that I was thinking about a lot with while I was reading was the fact that like group formation for the purposes of cooperating to achieve, a common goal can be essential. Sometimes there are things that you just can't do if you go it alone.
Yeah.
I recently hosted, I think maybe Nick was there, hosted a salon on cooperation. Um, and, you know, one of the, it's sort of easy to say, you're in a groupthink situation. Okay, well, exit and go alone and speak freely. But sometimes you have to work together with other people. And, I'm curious if you have a perspective on like what are features of groups that actually do work well and communicate together and can achieve those goals, versus the ones that end up succumbing to groupthink. And so like, when we're thinking about kind of both establishing groups, say we're leading a group at work or even, within a family or something like that, like what are the sort of norms that we can hold that will lead to better outcomes?
hmm Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what I found in my own experience and like also researching for the book and interviewing a lot of people is as long as there's space for dissent, then people feel safe to kind of, voice their truth or challenge the leader, whoever's kind of in charge of the group. That seems to have better outcomes. I also kind of noticed along the way that, when there's like really strong norms in a group and you can kind of feel it or sense it, like even down to the way people talk, the vocabulary they use, the way they dress, like their mannerisms and gestures. Like sometimes you can feel that really strongly in a group. Um, Whether it's, I don't know, even a group of like music enthusiasts, or like maybe you have like a group of hiking buddies, and like in certain contexts, people kind of fall into a certain way of interacting or something. For me, I've always felt like really weirded out by that. And I've always really appreciated when I was in a group setting where even though we did have some common interest or some kind of common setting that brought us together, I still felt like I was in the company of individuals. I found that like very reassuring, actually. So I don't know if it's so well defined in terms of, the group should have this kind of practice or there's kind of these kind of norms. I'm sure there are psychologists and group facilitators who have looked at like sort of the practicalities of that. I'm not a therapist. I was kind of just documenting my own journey with this and interviewing other people. Um, but that's sort of like what I would say. It looks like we have a comment saying, how is that different from diversity? And it's a great point. I do think you need just like straight up diversity. I think it's kind of odd that these days we've broken this term diversity up into so many different types of diversity. Like you can have racial diversity, or you can have economic diversity, or you can have viewpoint diversity. Like in reality, you should have all of that. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to hear comments from other people too.
Yeah, I wonder whether, some of the reason we went that way is almost because those things like are thought to inform viewpoint diversity in the sense that economic diversity, racial diversity is very likely going to bring together people from who have had different experiences and backgrounds.
Mhm.
Um, right? And so as a result would have different points of view rather than the same. But it's an interesting thing, the sort of diversity question, and it makes me think of kind of being in workplaces potentially with sort of you mentioned even dress code, right? Like where there's like a fairly defined dress code, everyone's wearing a similar kind of like business casual outfit, and how much that can kind of that especially layered with like a hierarchy that can make it difficult to speak up if you're like a more junior person. Um, it makes you wonder whether changing some norms in those sorts of environments could be helpful. Um, yeah. I'm curious, you obviously spoke a lot in the book about social media and the internet, and I'm curious. One thing that kind of came to mind for me as I was going through those parts was, wondering about whether the internet is creating silos of information that promote groupthink, right? Where you're following people and then the algorithm is showing you more of what, it thinks you already like. And so you end up thinking, everybody agrees with me, or whether the internet actually is, bringing us into contact with more people that disagree with us than ever before we ever would have encountered before, right? Before the internet, you basically could only communicate with the people in your community, in your surroundings who, generally by definition would have had similar kinds of experiences to you. And so there's sort of this tension of like, is it creating a more siloed experience, or actually like we're running into views that are so different? And I wonder if, you have a take on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's really confusing actually because I think the issue with the internet, and I looked at this a little bit in the book, is that you don't know who you're coming into contact with. And then the whole thing around self-silencing is you actually oftentimes don't really know people's beliefs or what they really think. And I think people themselves actually don't fully know what they think. And then even if they do have some idea about something, they lie and they're putting on a persona and a performance. So you have all of these layers that are in the way of actually like answering that question, right? Like, am I really
Not that
encountering?
different from real life, right? Like Nate could lie to me right now about what he really thinks.
It's super early.
I feel like the whole, and I talked to some psychologists about this, like that there's a real um, importance around body language and having like in-person conversations and two people being in the same room and like picking up on each other's cues and um I think there's a different level of communication there, and I think it's a little harder to hide these things, and also you don't have a potential audience of thousands or millions, right? That's going to kind of thwart or distort what you say, how you say it, and that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I did talk in the book about sort of early internet history, what a lot of um, sociologists and psychologists were noticing, predicting. I think the early days of the internet, there was like such a hopeful sense. And I think even social media, Twitter was such a pleasant place. Like I remember how fun it was to just hop on there and you'd see a blogger from, Kazakhstan or Cambodia just being like, this is what I did today. And it was so interesting and new and captivating, right? And then it kind of slowly devolved. Um, so yeah, I think it's hard to say. It's like depending on the time frame, like yes, it's bringing people together from so many different corners of the planet, and that's like so interesting. But then now we just have all these weird sort of incentives and question marks around who am I interacting with? Is what they're saying for real? Are they just doing this for the clicks and the likes and that kind of thing? I mean, wouldn't you say like how do you all feel when you're on the internet these days? It feels
Uh,
kind of blurry to me.
So I was gonna ask because you didn't mention anything about like rationalists or like I Teapot, but Teapot has been co-opted by other groups. Teapot stands for this part of Twitter. But like the Teapot that became Vibe Camp, sort of thing. If you're familiar with that at all,
I'm
those
not.
like
Does this sound familiar at all, or
no.
are you not in that in group?
No, I don't know. I don't know this stuff. Sorry.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, this is a like group on. I mean, there's a group on Twitter. There's a group that like mostly talks on less wrong, but like that is formed discourse norms that I think are very good, very like able to talk through disagreement or whatever and like stay on subject. Like a lot of times you do whataboutism or whatever and like you just kind of rapid fire like I was reminded of this and so now I'm bringing that up and now we're talking about a completely different thing that we were just talking about and we haven't resolved the original thing and like there's just a lot of I want to almost say social technology
Okay.
that was brought up through the sequences is a thing on Less Wrong, which is just 2,000 page like series of blog posts that some guy wrote in 2007 or something. Um, but like that's where I spend a lot of my time in like on the internet and it's like it's kind of obvious when you step out of that and like see somebody but like it's very interesting to watch the interaction between like a normie versus like one of these people where it's like okay like you seem to be saying this like I think this because of that like do you agree with this statement sort of thing where it's just like it's bringing back into like this is what we're talking about right now can you um yeah
Yeah, that sounds really healthy.
A lot of the time it is. Esther, I see you turn on your camera. Do you have something that you'd like to
Yeah.
add?
I was sorry, I was late. It's really early here in San Diego. Um,
Whoa!
but I was just going to say that like I haven't even been able to get on Twitter anymore. I kind of have seen, and it's interesting because I really believe in like agency when it comes to what you're doing online and like you really have to craft your own algorithm. You really have to like seek out, different spaces and voices, I think. And it's something I try to do. But Twitter got to the point where I just like I couldn't even be on it. It just felt like caricatures, like the worst caricatures of groups. And to me, it's like it's almost like at that point, it's just like propaganda. It's not even
Mm.
helpful for understanding each other, and it actually makes us think less well about other people and about ourselves.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that's really well put, really well said. And good for you for not being on Twitter X these days. I can't help it. I think there's a part of me that's like really fascinated by the dynamics that play out there. I guess especially as someone who was active on it early, just kind of like see the trajectory and just like what's happening and how did this happen and why are people so addicted to this? And I think it must be serving some human need. I mean, the fact that it draws in people with very sort of high conflict natures, I think is interesting and I think is representative of sort of like what what a lot of people are going through or what's not being met in their lives. That would be one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is like it's just a really unhealthy addiction. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question of like, is it bringing out something in us that's already there? And is it also manipulating us into something that we're not?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really hard to know. I think yeah, I'm in this new chapter in my life where I'm like living abroad again and traveling a lot and just like trying to really focus on my offline life and it's definitely made me feel better, right? I feel better about the world. I feel more connected to human beings. I feel more um in touch with myself and like, all the healthy stuff that should be there that we kind of got used to not having. And yeah, I don't know, something I recommend for everyone.
Um, I'm also off Twitter at this point. I can't go on it. My sort of metric for when to stay on a social media site or not is if I spend whatever 30 minutes scrolling and I get to the end and I feel worse than I started, I'm like, what am I doing spending my free time doing something that is making me feel worse at the end? And that's not a good way to spend free time. Um, what Nate was speaking about was this. So I'm familiar with the sort of this part of Twitter world a little bit. And one thing that reminded me of another question that I had for you in this vein, which is a lot of the accounts in that kind of realm are anonymous.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm very curious what your view is on anonymity
Hmm.
and the ability, like anonymity, not in like in a sort of traceable way, right? Like those accounts, some of those accounts kind of become very much known entities.
Hmm.
Um, but they're not like you kind of can't personally necessarily be tied to the social repercussions um,
Hmm.
of what you say. And I do wonder whether that provides a certain freedom to speak authentically and avoid self-silencing because you don't sort of have that ability for it to really spill over into your real life. There's
Hmm.
obviously occasional cases of people getting doxxed or whatever, but it's relatively rare.
So I want to clarify. So are you saying that there's a lot of anonymous accounts in that healthy area of Twitter?
Yeah.
That's really interesting, right? Because there's obviously a lot of anonymous accounts in the unhealthy part of Twitter. And I've had this question, like I'll be like, oh yeah, I just wrote this book, people self-silence, blah, blah. And they're like, really? It seems like people don't self-silence. It seems like people just blurt out whatever they want. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but like even that's not really authentic. So to answer your question around anonymity and sort of like not self-silencing in like a healthier section of Twitter. I guess for me, this intersects with the whole cancel culture thing. Because I think if you're saying that this is a healthy space, there's like a healthy expression, there's not a lot of self-silencing. I'm assuming that what you're reading from these anonymous accounts are more thoughtful posts then. Like they're people who are
Yeah.
taking the
Very
time.
thoughtful, very nuanced a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Um, but sort of maybe saying things that are out of the mainstream, out of the kind of, you know,
Yeah.
collective kind of expectations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, if they're so thoughtful and they're taking the time to do all of this, then yeah, they might be okay. For example, maybe they are gainfully employed somewhere and they just like can't really talk about this publicly because that's the issue with cancel culture, right? Like someone
Yeah.
is going to grab onto like a string of three words in the middle of a sentence, pull it out, make a huge issue of it, mob, pile on, like all of that. That would just be like my first guess around that. And I think that that's what I started noticing, like going from being a journalist who felt so excited about social media and felt really free and comfortable to like noticing this like trend of getting smaller and quieter in myself and in others, right? It made me feel like, okay, it's not okay to be nuanced. The internet is frankly just not a place to be nuanced anymore. Um, so that would, yeah. That would be my guess.
I
Yeah, it's oh, go on, Nick.
I think somewhat that's a clash of cultures sort of thing. So like having grown up on the internet and especially in like video game spaces, like everyone just like gave themselves a name and like everyone refers to it as that. Right. So like
Okay.
my account like doesn't have my name on it, but like my pinned tweet is a picture of me. So like I'm not like really hiding that much. But if I'm, watching a Super Smash Bros. Tournament or something, like the people's names there aren't like secret, but everyone just calls them by their like gamer tag. Um,
Mm,
and so I think a lot of the anonymous accounts, at least that are not being trolls and saying things that would get you fired if people knew about it,
mhm.
are like kind of just of that internet culture where, you can give yourself whatever name you want and then go by your tag and then people know you by that. But
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I was going to say is it also makes me think of, public forums and sort of conferences and things where there's a lot of new technology that says like submit your questions, through this app or something like that, and then so that you don't have to stick your hand up and sort of own your question, especially if it's something that, maybe you
Hmm.
don't want to necessarily say in front of the group, but
Hmm.
that the thoughts can then still be kind of raised. So I'm curious, have you had any
Hmm.
experiences with this kind of tech that sort of allows for maybe dissent or pointed questions to be raised without individuals having to necessarily like take the take the social hit for having asked them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's pretty common practice. Again, I just wonder though if that is related for me, my perspective, I feel like that would be kind of like that cancel culture perspective. Like if you're so afraid to say something in public, that means that it's too scary to talk about something in public. Why is it scary? Like there's some kind of consequence or ramification there that I don't think we feared as much before, or maybe that's naive, but in my experience, I feel like I wasn't scared before.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think groupthink, extends beyond just identity and cancel culture based issues. It can extend to, I think this question's kind of dumb, or this question's on a topic that's awkward,
Hmm.
or is going to, cast a bad light on the leader of my team, or whatever it
Oh,
is that,
sure. Yeah.
like things like that would
Yeah.
lead you to not speak up, right? I mean, I think groupthink is a much more expansive phenomenon than simply sort of cancel culture.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if that would be group think though. Like if someone had like a kind of simple reason to not want to name something like, I don't know if I would categorize that as group think. It's if it's in a healthy setting, right? It's just sort of basic respect or something. It's kind of like
Yeah.
respecting the norms or something. Um, but I mean, I will say I've been in some spaces where that wasn't the case. I think I went to this conference, maybe some of you were there. It was called Dissident Dialogues. It was in New York a couple of years ago. It was really interesting, great speakers, and I feel like it was kind of the opposite. Like people were encouraged to speak up, say things, even risking it being controversial, because that was kind of the theme of the conference, right? So again, it was like a safe space to challenge ideas and challenge each other. And so I think you can do the opposite quite well. Have
Yeah.
you guys been in spaces where it was safe to dissent, like in person?
on big groups.
Not in big groups.
Yeah.
It,
It's
it like
usually like
in
one-on-one
in
with someone I really trust.
in big groups, it's weird because like I mean, I don't I don't know what the dynamic is you're picturing, but just like if somebody says something and like everyone who like has a different opinion like butts in and is like, actually, I think this, like it's just like not conducive
Mhm.
to like conversation or whatever. And so I mean this is one of the things that I thought of to ask you is like if you're in a group chat or whatever and somebody like says something and there's kind of there's a way that you say it that you just expect everyone to agree with it, right?
Mhm.
And so like there can kind of be a, this is the perspective of the group chat, even if that's never established.
Mhm.
But also if you just butt in and like, like react to somebody's post by saying, I disagree with that, or like writing out a whole explanation of why you think you disagree with that. Like that's not really polite or like it doesn't work great. And so I wondered what your like uh preferred way of handling that, or I mean it very much depends on like the specific circumstance, but in a, dinner of 8 people or, a group chat of 20 or something, like what do you do when somebody says something in the we all agree with this right tone,
Oh,
and like
yeah.
you disagree?
Oh, that's so tough. Yeah, I mean, I talked about that a little bit in the book, like kind of what Taylor was alluding to in the beginning, like, ha the kind of the balance of cooperation and like actually meeting people. And that was kind of a journey I had to go on as well. Like you can't, your whole life can't just be about like just championing what you have to say, right? It's a constant balance between um functioning in society, right? But I think the point is that every individual has to kind of make that call themselves and make those choices along the way for themselves and have a sense of agency. Like, okay, I'm not going to whatever, like raise a huge issue in this big family conversation because maybe it's not as important to me as it is to others. And so I'm going to kind of go along with the group. It's not going to have like this huge impact for me. Somebody else might feel really differently, right? Like maybe they have felt really excluded in family gatherings or something, and it's like boiling up. And so that need that they have is like really incredibly strong to kind of be seen, be heard, and things like that. Um, I guess I want to add here too, which I didn't really talk about this much in the book, but I think in hindsight I realize is like an interesting, it's a unique lens here. I was raised Baha'i, which is like this Middle Eastern faith from the 1800s. It's pretty like socially progressive. My father was Jewish, my mother was Christian, and they like converted to this faith. And this faith has a very strong emphasis actually on like debate and dialogue. So I grew up going to all these gatherings where people were encouraged to publicly kind of say what they agreed and disagreed on. And so that was my norm. And it's taken me like many years to realize that, people don't really grow up this way. There's like such a huge emphasis on hierarchy in the world. Like I didn't really grow up with that. The Baha'i kind of philosophy is a lot more flat. It's a religion, so you still have groupthink, and there's still sort of like a consensus way of doing things, which some people love, some people don't like that. So I guess I personally might have less experience in some of the more typical like environments where you really don't challenge people and things like that. So I guess I feel like I should mention that.
Interesting. We have some really good questions, I think, in the chat. I don't know if Sombra and Esther, if you want to say your own question, or if I should just read them out.
I'm happy to say it. So I was wondering if you think there are kind of questions or topics or thoughts that are meaningful, thoughtful, nuanced, interesting, maybe even very important, but they're somehow kind of antisocial in terms of like they, make society not work as well, or the given group in which it comes up not work as well. And like, yeah, how to deal with those things if there are such things.
So I see in your comment here, the topics that you're bringing up, it sounds like that you're wondering are antisocial are topics around like someone bringing up the question of free will and responsibility or like
Maybe
moral.
I was thinking about like on a large societal scale that might be one because we rely so much on certain ideas about human responsibility, but maybe in a smaller group it could be like any idiosyncratic thing that holds that group together. If you start like kind of questioning it a little bit, it can like definitely hurt the group dynamic.
And so is the question like, how do you decide whether to bring those things up? Or is the question, are
Maybe.
those like cohesion killers or like what's the question?
Yeah, I think my question generally is okay, like maybe I could start from my belief is kind of that it's always in the end better to kind of try to discuss this, but like I don't know if there's like good strategies to do so or like how to
Mm,
pass through those levels of like we actually have to go to a worse place to come back and get to a better
uh-huh.
place. That's how I see it. Like I don't want like I'm just curious if you have any thoughts
Yeah.
around this topic.
Yeah, that's a really cool question. I think about that a lot. I feel like I think it's really hard, right? I think there's a reason that like interintellect was born, right? And like these in other like interesting groups that have there's a need for them, right? They've needed to carve out spaces for kind of select people who value a certain depth of thought and conversation. Because I think that it's not the norm. And I think it's okay to say that. Like it's just not, right? That's why these things tend to be small and some people have found each other online. You usually find like one or two people you can really kind of have this level of depth with, maybe in like your real life or from school or something like that. It's just not a widespread common thing. Um, I think this is hard to talk about because this relates to kind of some of my earlier work and my own personal journey. So I wrote a book in 2020 that was all about what we call neurodiversity, which really just means neurological diversity. It's kind of been co-opted and means a million other things now, but what drew me to that term was really what it meant philosophically, like valuing neurological diversity, which I think is basically a synonym for viewpoint diversity. But it's really interesting because in that world, like the kind of neurodivergent space, is where you find a lot of people who really value a certain level of depth and are okay with challenging hierarchy and things like that. So it's been fascinating to really realize the overlap in these two conversations. So I'm just trying to answer your question, like, are there best practices or not? It's so hard to say because I have become content with not having a community around depth of conversation, largely because I have it with my husband, who I spend every day with. And so I've had to just be like, okay, like we've got it. I think when I was a kid growing up and I had so many existential questions and I just thought that was normal. And then I had to learn like it's not normal. And a lot of people don't want to talk about these things. And I just kind of had to accept the loneliness that came with that, right? So, I don't know. Like, I just don't know if we'll ever be the majority, like the people who want to talk at that level. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. Like, do you think there's something evolutionary there, or there's something that preserves the human species and the cohesiveness of it by not getting too deep? I don't know. It's a question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have a good answer, but like, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Very relatable, truly.
I, I think those
Yeah.
are separate goals, like peacekeeping, cohesiveness, that you can kind of see in like the way I view the prohibition on drawing Muhammad in Islam is like probably mostly a peacekeeping thing because once you put something down on a page, like people can agree or disagree with it or fight over it. and so you just ban it all together and say like you're not allowed to do this. And so there is a um, kind of a coalition peacekeeping um, frame uh, that like you want to have in order to, I don't know, keep a group together or keep a group from like infighting. And then there is like truth seeking, which is a very different goal on
Mhm.
like what is it that we're actually talking about? Like, can you, you know, describe the, I'm gonna keep going on religion because I started off with that. But like keep going on like the qualities of God. Like, does God interfere in life? Does he like think that this is correct? Does he care? Like kind of like all those details that even within the same church and people who like grew up in the same environment probably disagree, but like the questions are kind of never brought up unless you get a particularly truth-seeking person. I associate
Mhm.
this with what I would call autists. Um, but
Right.
uh, like, yeah, like that's a different goal than peacekeeping.
Yeah.
I like associate peacekeeping more with feminine energy.
Mhm.
And like women are more keen to that. But like probably the nerd distinction is the bigger one between people who want to
Mm.
like actually, you know, fight about the um specifics of something versus, you know, want to um make friends and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's so interesting. Yeah, I've had to think about that a lot too. And as I was writing the book, and um, there does seem to be some kind of autistic tendencies in the so-called like heterodox space. I'm sure you're all familiar with that term. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think I kind of agree. Like, I think that there does seem to be a segment of the population that prioritizes the truth telling and the truth seeking and does not prioritize the keeping the peace thing. And a fair amount of those people do tend to be what we would call neurodivergent. Um, a lot of the kind of heterodox thinkers that I interviewed for the book identify that way. It does beg the question whether there's just like real overlap, if they're kind of the same thing, if we're all just talking about the same thing, the same personality trait. Um, so yeah, it's a really interesting uh, thing to discuss.
I wonder whether there's, some sense in which society needs both types of people to work well. The thing that comes to mind, right, is you sort of have these, like, I think of the intellectual dark web, right, which had this like moment where they were like, we're going to be all heterodox thinkers together, and now they're like, we hate each other, and it's
Oh,
everyone, it's like they're all worst enemies all of a sudden.
um,
Um, and maybe there was in that moment a lack of someone being like, well, maybe we could try to be friends. And that maybe society works better when you have kind of this like the right balance of both types.
yeah, yeah. I think it would be so good to like brainstorm this because I think like the people that I've met along this journey, like it does seem like there are so many people who really just value diversity of thought for the sake of it and do want it to be this kind of friendly exchange, which seems like what interintellect is about. And then it does seem like I don't know, maybe the ego stuff kind of got in the way with certain people. I don't know. I didn't really trace that. Maybe you all did, or I don't know what you saw or Taylor, maybe what you think about why do you think it crashed like with certain people? Do they get too big, too public?
I mean, I think my view of it was that like they found points on which they really, really disagreed
Yeah.
and couldn't they ended up falling into the exact kinds of like behaviors. This actually leads into like the sort of last set of questions I was thinking of asking you, which we can get to or not, but you sort of speak a bit in the book about debate as
Mhm.
being a really productive kind of form of sort of learning how to kind of see different sides of an issue, but also kind of, good with some good norms of communication. And one of the things that comes to my mind when I think about this, there's sort of two questions. The one is whether, debate is inherently adversary in such a way
Hmm.
that one side wins and the other side loses, and the better path would be something that kind of listens to everyone and finds a positive sum solution. But the other one is that there's sort of a difference between learning about both sides and then being told, okay, today you're arguing for, versus
Hmm.
actually, I really personally care and have real stakes in my argument, right? I'm not just like playing with these ideas. I really care about them. And I think that
Yeah.
that's probably what ended up being the downfall of something like the intellectual dark web, is that they
Hmm.
disagreed in ways that were not like, they were like, I can see your side. I can like
Hmm.
intellectually see your side, but I disagree with it so firmly on a personal level.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great like kind of synopsis. Yeah, I think like for me, debate, I think again, because of how I grew up in this kind of unique setting, to me, debate meant was not like this intensely argumentative thing. It was more like a real comfort with just bouncing things around and having to always have the flexibility around entertaining a very different perspective and like not being threatened by that. Because I've had this question before, like, oh, Janara, are you like, really? It's all about debate. And I think some people, when they hear the term debate, they think of this intense, like, I'm doing this to win thing. And that's not what I meant. And again, I think it was very much like informed by my own exposure. So I think there is a way to have debate where like it's friendly and you're open and you're enjoying the intellectual exercise of it. But you're right. At the end of the day, some people cling very strongly to something that they believe in and a conclusion that they've arrived at. Um, I guess you could debate the merits of that. That might be a weird thing to say, but like, should we be so attached to our opinion? Or, should you, um, I guess people could argue that, of course, that's what like individual freedom is all about. I feel like I know people who are kind of, they're okay with things being a little like less clear and less certain, like a majority of the time. And maybe that's dangerous and unhealthy and not productive for society, but I would say it's kind of like a posture or a way of carrying yourself in the world that might make you less offended by things, or it would lead to the downfall of friendships and relationships maybe less often if you're not so attached.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm wondering about, say, a debate around policy that actually really like impacts people's lives, right? And you can
Right.
kind of have someone say, like maybe, if we look at like the whole society, this policy is going to like on average, like I mean, this
Yeah.
gets into like really deep philosophical questions, right? About like, is is it like utilitarianism the right way to go, right? Is the best
Right.
kind of net and taking everyone's sort of little improvements and problems into account and then figuring out which one like the math comes out right. Is that like how we should have policies, or should we have policies that like focus on reducing suffering for people at the bottom, and I would never critique someone for saying I'm against this policy because it would personally like really negatively impact me, even if,
Hmm.
for society as a whole, it might be, the one that's more practical. I would never say, well, you're not really considering both sides of this. I think
Hmm.
that there's people debate things that are more than just kind of, you know, ideas sometimes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't think I have a good answer for that. I mean, at the end of the day, then, yeah, I mean, if people just can't agree on like very real life issues and it's like such a big deal to them, then, I guess they are entitled to go their different ways. Kind of sucks for society and humanity, but I think at the end of the day that also is part of human nature, right? Like having to put up a wall and like carve out where you draw the line. Unfortunately, we can't always, yeah, maintain the flexibility.
Yeah. I guess it's just tough because like we have to agree on a policy, right, as a society, right? We can't just be like, well, off you go, bye. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes you can. I
Yeah.
guess you can be like, I want to leave this country and move to a different one or something like
Right.
that.
Well, you don't have to agree. You have to accept and adapt, right? Depending
But
on
right.
who's in power and who like holds that role in society. And I think, yeah, we all have to kind of accommodate depending on where we fall and what our position is. And yeah.
Yeah. Nate's had his hand raised for a long time,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna let him speak.
Oh, so I raised my hand when we were talking about the heterodox thing, because that
Yeah.
was something that I wrote down as wanting to ask here. So I'm like softly against considering yourself a heterodox thinker. I think one because like you're almost like privileging the like default view in some ways, whereas like a different way to think about it is the um like I have my view, you have yours, like let's talk about it and like decide, which one of us has a better points. And two, I think heterodox thinking like it kind of comes with a victim complex, where you think of yourself as like the outsider, persecuted thing, and in a discussion, a lot of the times, like if you're talking to someone and you try to make your like it's bad to go meta within the context of the discussion to say like we should be allowing other viewpoints and you're like making this a filter bubble and like all this stuff where I think it's much more helpful to kind of stay object level where like if you have a point like make the point and don't be like saying how like oh like this is the controversial or whatever like um, just kind of make your point straightforwardly and bringing
Mm.
up the rest of society and pulling them in like doesn't help the conversation you're having right now. So like I think in the book you call yourself a heterodox thinker, and I wondered what your perspective was on that, given those things or why you like that label.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I call myself a heterodox thinker. Maybe I do. But so at the time I was writing the book, I mean, I started writing this book in like 2022, and that was just kind of like the term, that was being like this because I was trying to document this kind of emerging space. I think maybe in some ways it was kind of an outgrowth of the intellectual dark web like space. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I was just looking at the chat to see all the comments, and yeah, you mentioned a lot of the names that I wrote about in the book, Coleman Hughes, Emma Camp, Megan Daum. And yeah, the heterodox term was kind of just what we were using to refer to this space of people who were maybe not like super hardcore into the woke thing, and I mean, all of these terms.
Heterodox Academy is part of that, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Jonathan Haidt, his focus on viewpoint diversity and all of that. And I think like sometimes we have these terms, these labels, these names in reaction to other things, right? It's because there wasn't really a safe space to diverge and to dissent. And so, it's kind of you're like kind of colonizing language in a sense, like you're naming something, right? And then it becomes this. I mean, that happened with neurodiversity, right? Like that suddenly became this huge buzzword, and sometimes these things take off. So, I mean, my understanding of heterodox is really just means like diversity of viewpoint or unconventional viewpoint. And so I don't think there's anything harmful about that label. Like it's just a word, right? I hear your point around maybe the way it's employed is not helpful. Or you mentioned like maybe it kind of gives way to like having a victim mindset because it's like you're kind of making yourself like separate. that could make sense. I think, sure, I think like some people who maybe have been very frustrated in piercing through group settings and not having their opinions heard. Sure, I could see like how a victim mindset would grow if you like really hammer on that all the time. I don't think by and large I see that though in the so-called heterodox community, because I think if people found the heterodox community and have felt some relief in that space, they don't really feel like victims anymore because they've found the people who also value diversity of thought. I think by and large that's what I've seen. So yeah.
Um, I'm curious to bounce back to a question Esther asked in the chat much earlier about sort of data and sort of are there any metrics out there on how many are self-silencing on certain topics or trends of people self-silencing? Um,
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to think if there's anything that's recently come out. I don't think I saw any kind of really widespread documentation, like interviews, or like surveys, like how much do you voice your opinion or you hold back. There was a certain amount of data on like how people respond to um, opinions that they disagree with online, like on Facebook, like someone posts an article and um, do you do you choose to voice your opinion? Do you ignore it? I don't really remember like the numbers around this, but it was interesting to read how it's documented in the sense that people do seem to kind of split into two. Like there's a certain group, there's a certain demographic that really leans into that and will engage when they see like news articles that don't support their point of view, and it's something that they actually seek out, and they kind of want that clash of opinion. And then there's sort of like another demographic that really kind of does not click on that article and does not want to engage in it and is kind of constantly like only searching for things that they agree with. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have like numbers on that right now.
No, it's okay. I wasn't even looking for like specific numbers, just like, do we have a sense of scale of like what is happening? Especially in like politics right now. I'm very curious, like because we talked about a point earlier where it's like it seems like there's so many people just willing to like just shoot their mouth off and say whatever, and there's too many like people just wanting to say whatever. But I'm just thinking about the like silent, not middle, but just like the people that are just like quiet because they're just afraid of like both like either side
Yeah.
going crazy on them. So I'm just really curious about the scale of this.
Well, me too. I mean, like if we look at the success of Barry Weiss's project, right, the Free Press and being sold to CBS, and I think they're at 2 million subscribers now. So, I mean, the markets can kind of tell us a little bit, right? I mean, that was a successful startup, and there's clearly a huge market for it, and there's, a lot of interest, a lot of paid subscribers. And I don't know, yeah, I don't know if social science researchers have really taken this in yet. It usually kind of takes some time to catch up to these kind of trends and start looking at it like, sort of from an academic perspective. Um, but I have to say, like, anecdotally, like, I just hear this over and over all the time, right? I mean, I think that's why there was also a market for this book and why so many people I interviewed said the exact same thing, right? Many people refer to this silent majority, feeling politically homeless, feeling like they can't talk to people, they're scared to talk to people, that they miss being able to. There is a feeling, it seems like, of people having a memory of being able to do this and then now feeling like they can't, which I think is really interesting. It's kind of this it's silently like kind of crept up on us. That's how it feels to me. And maybe that was like, for example, the way Twitter changed over time. And I know some people have tried to mark in time, like when that happened. And a lot of people refer to 2014, 2015. I still don't know if we have a clear answer on what changed to kind of create that before and after feeling of I used to be able to speak my mind and now I can't, which it sounds like what you're asking about.
Yeah. And this also ties to the other question around like political leaders. You think, is
Mhm.
there anyone out there doing nuance well? Which, like to Trey's point, it's like it's very hard for politicians to do nuance. They need sound bites, right? But like, if there is this like giant silent majority that is craving that, like why aren't we bringing about politicians that are doing this, that are representing that? Like why do we have the extremes that just keep and I know there are politicians out there that are trying to do that, but they don't get any airtime. We don't even know about them. The ones that are like in the trenches having those like boring, nuanced policy discussions, it's I'm just curious about that representation of like there seems to be this massive group of people that are craving that, and yet we can't seem to get the representation on the leadership level for that.
Yeah, yeah, I think this is a really interesting area to discuss because I mean, there's a couple, right? I think like Governor Cox in Utah was like fairly heterodox on certain things. I think he was actually quite like he's a Republican, he's conservative, but I think he was like very trans friendly, which was very interesting and a unique combination, right? That's kind of heterodox. It's not something you would normally pair. Um, I think it's fascinating that, you know, Newsom, right? Like when he launched his podcast, I think wasn't one of his first guests like Charlie Kirk. So I feel like you see these politicians come out when they feel like they can, or like when the moment is right. And I think that Newsom kind of I think under the surface, everyone knows that this would be a good, interesting direction to go in, right? Like being sort of leaning into, hey, it's okay to talk about a diversity of ideas. Hey, I don't have to completely agree with sort of the checklist of talking points that my party is supposed to. So I think you're right. Like there's a hunger for it. We're seeing that with news publications. So I think you're right that there's a hunger for it politically with like elected representation. I think it's probably like too scary. I don't know if there's enough like funding there for to support a person to kind of stay in that realm. I'm also reminded of Ezra Klein, like when the Abundance book came out, one of their first media stops was the free press and honestly Barry Weiss's podcast. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it seems like when the moment is right, like people are willing to kind of open up that part of themselves and then they kind of retreat back into their camp. But the fact that they even go there shows that they're like there's a kind of pull, I think. I think the issue is that they can't stay in that space. Like they just can't do that long enough and safely maintain their support.
One thing that I was wondering when you were speaking about this kind of phenomenon of being like, I used to be able to speak my mind and now I feel like I can't anymore. It makes me think about a younger generation who maybe won't have had that experience. And what you think, how you think like norms might change over time as they kind of grow up in a world where there is no real memory of that kind of freedom.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I'm kind of like of two minds about it because I have a lot of concerns about Gen Z. I think the whole like Gen Z stare thing is really real. I think the like ghosting emails thing is very real. There just seems to be a huge resistance to communication, which really scares me. Um, on the other hand, I feel like that Gen Z seems kind of like so chill about everything that maybe they will like learn to live their offline lives really well. Because there doesn't seem to be a huge urgency around like ambition, and I don't know, like I'm a millennial. It seems like a very different vibe. Um, so that's that. In terms of not having like a memory of being able to speak freely, I think that's obviously really sad. I think that some of them probably are carving out spaces where they can do that. Hopefully it's happening on university campuses. I don't see a ton of it happening online. I mean, I'd love to be corrected if any of you are aware of spaces online where like where it's
You
happening.
you start having a shift towards like Twitter is open to everyone in the world, right? Like Discords are like more
Hmm.
like these specific people or whatever. And so like discussions will happen there and you can't see them and it's not like a news item because they're not just out in the open. But I think it's changing to be less, like posted to the world
Okay.
spaces.
Yeah, sort of
So
group
like,
chats and things like that.
Yeah.
yeah. But what do you think the long-term implications of that? I mean, in some ways, that's a return to normalcy, right? Like that would just be like real life in a sense. Like the internet is the anomaly, right? Being able to speak to thousands, millions of people at once is the anomaly. So in some ways, it could ground people back into kind of more normal communication and something that's less performative. What do you think? Or do you think that leaves like a hole and a gap for people with bad intentions then to take over those more public spaces?
So yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things about the 2014 to let's I mean still today period is that like institutions, people who made hiring and firing decisions at jobs like universities, HR departments, like all that sort of people were like taking Twitter very seriously. And when you had like a dog pile, like they would actually do things like fire people or not allow them on campus or I'm sure there are stories of people like having their acceptance to a university like rejected over these sorts of things. And so like if that continues, if those like institutions that control, the important things in the real world, maybe like the presidency, keep like considering Twitter to be an important thing, then like yeah, like the battle has to happen in the public space.
Mhm.
And the private spaces aren't as important. It would be great if like, leadership of the important real world stuff like kind of learns like, okay, 100,000 comments like on Twitter is still just 0.03% of the population or whatever. And like I don't need to like take action based on this, even though as a human,
Right.
I'm just not used to have 100,000 people yell at me and like think that that doesn't matter. That's kind of a hard thing to get through your head. And I would hope that you get to the point where, the important institutions stop caring about that. And then like the conversations can happen between people in ways that aren't public. Um, but yeah, I mean, the public spaces are uh, just important as long as the, real life stuff considers them important. And I would like them to leadership to not uh haven and make decisions based on pylons as much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting breakdown. Like I feel like it's just been so long hmm, since I personally have been part of like small group settings. Like I don't know, maybe that's a feature of being young. Like
Does
I feel
this
like
count?
sorry?
Does this count?
Yes, this counts. Great point. But this feels rare. This feels
Okay.
rare
Okay.
for me at least. Maybe I don't know, like maybe if there are regular inter-intellect members who attend often, then this starts to feel normal. For me, it feels really rare, and I think is one reason why I was so curious to write the book and really enjoyed meeting a lot of the people that I did, from writing the book. But in like my day-to-day life, yeah, like I'm not really a group chat person per se. I feel like I see that amongst high school and college students. And even for myself, when I think back, I think that was very defining, right? Like you're part of like a select group of people, a group of friends, a group of classmates. I don't know. I feel like it's a feature of millennial adulthood that you don't live that way. Maybe that's too much of a generalization, but that's what I see. I don't know. What do you
I
guys
mean,
think?
like the school environment like puts people together, right? Like you're
Yeah,
kind of forced to be together, and so you form interactions among that. And that
exactly.
doesn't
Right.
happen automatically as an adult, at least not if you don't like your coworkers. Um,
Yeah. I
Yeah.
would say like it's for me, it's been very interesting as a parent because you do start to have that a little bit with your kids' school because that becomes like a focal point and you're like so invested and like some really interesting conversations happen amongst the parents, but it's all centered around the kid kind of. And so if you find a kind of compatible group that does give you a similar sense of belonging, kind of just like the adulthood version of it. But I've talked to many people, it's like, once they graduate and then you're out of that, like then you don't have that community either. You're no longer tied to other parents in the same way. So that's been kind of interesting to experience.
We have a couple questions in the chat, and then I think we can maybe wrap up after those. Trey asked, and I think he might need to elaborate a little bit because I don't really understand this question. But in your book, did you discuss any overlap between groupthink and fan service in news services? I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
Fan service. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can elaborate. The fan service in news is try to define it real quick. It's basically when news organizations, and I'm actually using smaller news organizations as an example. They cater to a specific group. Um, and you can see this. The first tell is when the headlines all go a certain way, not even necessarily the articles, but the headlines to draw you in. um, are always one way, and it's so they have to live off subscribers. So they provide fan service. They don't necessarily provide the news, and when they do provide the news, it's buried to the point you have to work very hard to get the nuance and the details. Um, and it's like I find, and this is the fan service actually comes out of sports reporting because they have the trend there, and it's been very, very blatant, has gone from used to have reporters that would show up at a game, and this is before everything was streamed and televised and all that, and they just report what happened. To it's you only fans of a certain team, college, pro, whatever, they're only going to look at the person that's going to tell them it's like the refs were against us. Which, I knew of one person that was always the case. And it's just like, dude, can't take you seriously because, I'm watching the game that you're calling. But now that's gotten over, not now, it's been a while, into like political reporting with the majority of the outlets. And it's so I it's sorry, I'm trying to wrap up the question. And when I communicate with and also when I communicate with people that subscribe to these various outlets, it's like there's a groupthink amongst the people that subscribe. And so
Hmm.
that's what I'm trying to connect the two. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. And I think that you're talking about a kind of business model, I think that we've seen in the internet, that evolved sort of out of blogs and then into these sort of niche websites. Like I'm thinking of I don't know, like little fashion websites and tech websites and things like that. Now we're in like the newsletter era, um, where you're catering to an interest group essentially. It's a very well-defined demographic. This is what they're about, this is what they're into. Um, yeah, and it's tough, right? Because that's no longer just like general news for a general audience. It's almost like a hobby group, right? But we don't call it that. So I can see why that is confusing, and maybe doesn't really sound like news, or what news is supposed to be, like in terms of it's supposed to be a bit more like neutral. So yeah, I can see a relationship there. It's not really something I looked at in the book. I think that was what your question was. I talk a little bit about the evolution of media and the news and sort of the whole concept of news and what the original purpose was, which like very early on in New York, for example, like early US history, it was really about um, connecting poor, lower income neighborhoods, actually. It was like it became this very empowering way for people to just know what was going on in the neighborhood. And it was very like useful and very much like appreciated. And it was a very sort of, it was like a service, like it really served a purpose, right? And then it evolved when it kind of it sort of became an elite thing when in New York people realized that there was like status associated with appearing in the news, and that you could feature, you know, a fancy dress shop or a fancy furniture store, or you know, make yourself known in a certain way, like this so and so showed up at the party. And so then the concept of news just really drastically evolved into like a status game. So that kind of service aspect of it sort of, you know, disappeared.
That was a very interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, Trey. Um, Esther asked, "Do you think the paradox of tolerance is valid?" And if that seems familiar already, then go for it. But otherwise, Esther, if you want to just quickly explain what the paradox of tolerance is.
Yeah. So the tension of like wanting to have viewpoint diversity, accept different viewpoints, but at some point there is a viewpoint or a way of thinking about how like a society should be that actually tramples on the tolerance of the society. So basically going from like an more open society to something more like authoritarian or, you know, closed. And at what point, I don't know, I'm just very interested in this tension of like, yes, I totally believe in like we need to exchange ideas and we need to do it in a thoughtful, respectful way. But at what point is it like, holy shit, we're actually like this idea is taking over and it's actually going to cause a lot of harm.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so tough. Like there's no easy answer for this. And I feel like if you zoom out and you just look at the course of history and the trajectory of history, you just see that constant push and pull. And like an optimistic way of looking at it would be kind of like checks and balances, like this government kind of went too far with this, and then there's a backlash, and unfortunately there's usually like a war, you know, that and then something, you know, that it swings the other direction. And you know, it's hard. It's really hard to kind of accept that about society and human nature and history, that because there's so many people on the planet and we're all complex individuals, we can't predict where things are going to go or how it's going to go. So even though we have like good intentions around wanting to support viewpoint diversity and tolerance, you're totally right. Like it's just kind of an unknown. So yeah, I don't know. I think what's scary is that I think this is the reason why people don't want viewpoint diversity, and they want to have these rules around what you can say, and things that you have to speak a certain way. And I really think that a lot of what we call woke now like had really good intentions in the beginning. That's my view. Like, I know you can make the argument that like it was just all for power from the get-go. I don't really think that's true. I think people like really did want to see a more equal society, and they had higher ideals around like social justice, and they wanted to support the marginalized. And I think that's like very lofty. I think some of that was corrupted, and people were not always aware that they were so power hungry. um so and then that led to a lot of censorship around like don't be hurtful, don't be hateful, don't say this about this group. And so um it just kind of went too far. But I think that maybe that's kind of an example of like wanting to be helpful, wanting to support our fellow man, but then it went too far. It just did, right? And we've had this huge backlash. And so we none of us can really control that, right? It kind of depends on who swoops in, who's in power. It's just a complete unknown. I'm very curious to see, in the US, like what happens on the left. I don't think they've figured it out. I don't know. I think I agree with your earlier point. Like, I think that if a really nuanced candidate emerged on the left, maybe they would have a good shot at this point. Um, so yeah, no easy answers. I'm open to hearing what you all think about that tension, of course.
Anyone have any other thoughts about that tension? I certainly feel completely kind of frozen in the face of it, to be honest. I mean, especially because I'm not even a citizen of this country. But
Yeah.
that is a
I think
separate
it's
issue.
been really interesting to watch. This is just another example. Shadi Hamid, I think he was on your platform, and I interviewed him, and he had me on his podcast. And I really love his work and his honesty, and I think that like he was very much into the heterodox thing, and then in recent years, sort of was questioning some of it, and then I think has kind of recently had to grapple with that, um, the reaction against the woke stuff. And I think, there is there are going to be people out there who are kind of going to regret the anti-woke move, and we'll see if they're going to kind of come back and actually be okay saying that out loud or publicly, and be like, actually, you know what? That did go too far. I don't want that. I'm going to come back, even if I don't fully agree with this camp over here. Maybe this is still better than that option. I haven't seen as much of that. I feel like the people who I've seen who went really anti-woke have kind of stayed there, and I don't know if they're really happy there and if they're happy with the results and the directions that things have gone in. But maybe they have made that choice and they're like, maybe this is still better. In the book, I did write about the what's called like the competition of needs, right? So everyone has kind of these core needs that drive them. So I think for a lot of the people that did go more anti-woke, some of the real driving need was around this theme of the truth seeking and the truth telling. And that became such an animating force for them that they were like, I have to counter all of this censoring that's happening. And so that was like a real gravitational pull. And it'd be interesting to see what happens in the next few years, and if there's like a different, stronger gravitational pull towards, actually, I really want to see humanity return to a more peaceful, loving place, and that kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. I think one thing you mentioned here that I think is interesting, and maybe is a fun place for us to kind of close, is the fact that especially if you're a public figure, I think changing your mind is almost the hardest part of all and saying, I believed this thing before and now I believe something else. And to kind of, I think for all of us to just recognize that like people's minds and people's positions are changing and in flux, and we're deciding things all the time, and that, as things change, our minds can actually change, and that doesn't mean that we're lying now, and it doesn't mean we were lying before. And I think navigating that is like going to be a particular challenge in this next kind of era, particularly politically, as I think things have become quite extreme kind of on both sides, and we're probably going to see a lot of people trying to sort of walk back moments where they went a little further than they had initially planned. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on into this Interact Salon. I think it's been interesting and a great discussion. We, hope you'll want to come back one day. And yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to connect with you all. Yeah, I mean, I think this is such a great example of one of these like small, really thoughtful spaces. So I think it's great that you're all here and doing this. And a funny point, I think I was originally calling my book Changing Our Minds. So it's really funny that you're kind of ending on that point.
yeah, I think it's the tough one. And yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure I can speak almost for the others in the room here, but I'm certainly grateful for the Intellect as a place that really welcomes, speaking up and sharing your view. And um you're always welcome to like come and hang out with us more as a
Ah,
member
I
of
should.
salons.
Yeah, it's great what you all are doing. It's so nice to connect with you, and thanks again for having me.
Wonderful. Have a
Thank
wonderful day, everyone who's at the beginning of the day, and a wonderful evening to you, Janara.
Thank you. Thanks so
you
much.
all.